In 1994, Steve Jackson Games released a card game. This was no ordinary card game because the name of this card game is called Illuminati New World Order. What's unsettling about the card game is the cards themselves feature illustrations of tragic events. Not only is it weird that a card game features such tragedies, but it's the fact that this card game predicted the future. Allegedly, this card game predicted the September attacks 7 years before the tragedy. In today's video, we talk about the card game that predicted the future and answer the question, how did they do it? Welcome back to another video, and for the record, I am aware that this video is way shorter compared to my other ones, and that's because there's not that much information about the Illuminati card game. There's only so much information that I can talk about, but luckily for you guys, I am covering everything about the card game in today's video. Go follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and a special little announcement that I want to make is that soon I will be doing some IRL content where I explore some haunted places with my friends, and who knows, I might bring some YouTubers with me. But enough blabbering, you're here for the topic. The year was 1994, and Steve Jackson Games, a board and card game company, released its newest card game. However, this was no ordinary game. Instead, it was a bizarre and spine-chilling game that predicted some of the world's most horrific tragedies, like the September attacks and the pandemic. It also predicted historical events such as Trump's election and the January 6th Capitol riot. This card game was called the Illuminati New World Order and was based on Steve Jackson Games' original 1982 Illuminati game. These games were inspired by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson's book, The Illuminatis Trilogy, that was released in 1975. But how is this game played, and how did it predict the future? For starters, players must try to conquer the world by using the powers of the Illuminati they've selected. They can pick one of the following: the Church of Subgenius, Society of Assassins, UFOs, Adepts of Hermes, Servants of Cthulhu, Shangri-La, Network, Bavarian Illuminati, Bermuda Triangle, Gnomes of Zurich, or the Discordian Society. Once they've chosen their Illuminati, the player has to take over 12 organizations to win the game. Players can also win by eliminating an enemy Illuminati by obtaining or destroying their last organization. Some organizations include the CIA, Men in Black, and the Boy Scouts. Aside from groups, a player can control people and locations. Individuals like Princess Diana, Ross Perot, and Saddam Hussein, and places such as Canada, Japan, California, and the Moonbase were all in the game. While this is already a strange concept in and of itself, the alarming part comes with the designs of certain cards. Let us use the Epidemic card as an example, which featured a disturbing picture of the world's grim reality during COVID-19, 26 years before the pandemic even started. We see a pile of body bags, a face mask, medical supplies, gloves, and the word quarantine. Many people believe that this card from the card game predicted COVID-19. Now, this could just be a huge coincidence, because after all, it's not like COVID-19 was the first ever pandemic that the world had. But it is kind of crazy looking back at this card that shows a lot of similarities to COVID. Another haunting card is the terrorist nuke, where two towers are seen with an explosion on the right hand side. This illustration is eerie similar to the events of the September attack, and it's even more unnerving to see this knowing it was made 7 years before the tragedy. Additionally, a Pentagon card shows the Department of Defense's headquarters engulfed in flames from the plane that crashed into it during the attack. Interestingly, a card about the fourth plane is missing. United Airlines Flight 93 was the only flight where the passengers fought back against the hijackers and saved countless lives through this heroic act. The plane would have crashed into the Capitol had it not been for the passengers and crew's intense bravery. It instead crashed into an empty field in Stony Creek Township, Pennsylvania, and killed all 44 people on board, including the terrorists. It is kind of crazy how the card game depicts illustrations from both of the attacks that occurred that day. Predicting these attacks 7 years prior to the tragedy is insane, and I don't know how they did it. But it's not like this card game is the only one to predict the tragedy. After all, there has been so much media that predicted the September attacks. However, that media never showed illustrations of the Pentagon. So the Illuminati card game did predict more from that god-awful day. May those who lost their lives that day rest in peace. Aside from the September attack cards, it is deeply perturbing to see a World War III card that shows a city getting nuked, given how accurate the game's predictions were. God forbid that comes to fruition. And if a World War III does happen, I do believe nuclear weapons would be a huge part of it, given how many other countries finally have nukes. Although World War III hasn't happened yet, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to predict that nuclear warfare will take place, since it's common sense that it will happen. Not the hardest one to predict. On a lighter note, the charismatic leader card had a drawing of a blonde man delivering a speech to a crowd of followers, which bore an unsettling resemblance to Donald Trump. It's important to mention that Trump was a bankrupt nobody when this game first came out, and it is unlikely that anyone who played Illuminati New World Order at that time would have believed the man depicted was Donald Trump. Not going to lie, I don't see this person in the card as Donald Trump. It does not look like him in my opinion, but this could just be a huge coincidence, but in all honesty, I just think that this is a huge stretch. I don't believe this card predicted Donald Trump becoming president, but many people believe it did. Other cards display the BLM movement, 2022 Canadian trucker strikes, gay activists, and political correctness, where you see 2 lynched men. One man was hung for using insensitive pronouns and the other for eating the flesh of dead animals. I don't know what this is trying to predict, because the only thing I found was that a few arrests have happened due to people misgendering others. Yeah, I know being arrested is way different than being hung, but that is the only closest similarity that I can find. And for the eating dead animals, I found nothing. It is very important to note that these card predictions aren't really that hard to predict in the first place. It's like me saying that next month for June, there's going to be a lot of gay parades. Is that even a prediction? Plus, this game came out in the 90s, so I doubt that they predicted that in 2013 the BLM movement would start. After all, before the 90s, they already had a lot of black advocacy movements since the 60s. So the card game is simply retelling the past, which history does repeat itself a lot. So these aren't really technically predictions, as many people would say. I could go on and on about these uncanny cards, but I'll be here all day if I did. Instead, let's focus on how Steve Jackson, the company's founder, devised the idea for such weird game and unintentionally predicted the future. In an interview, Jackson stated he wanted to make a game satirical and keep its tone tongue-in-cheek rather than serious. He also talked about the substantial research into conspiracy theories and cults he conducted to ensure the game was as unhinged as it could be.
It's possible to get deadly serious about conspiracies and assassinations. I didn't really want that. Among all the material I'd read, the articles with the really wacky theories, even if they were presented totally seriously, were the most fun to read. Logically speaking, a wacky game should be more fun to play. As much as possible, I wanted to retain the flavor of the conspiracy material I'd been reading. That's why groups like the South American Nazis, the cattle mutilators, the Floridators, the communists, the oil companies, and the United Nations are in there.
But what confirms Steve Jackson isn't clairvoyant is this quote from Lloyd Blankenship, a former employee at the company.
Steve is a huge fan of conspiracy theories. Not that he believes in them, as far as I could tell in 5 years of working with him, rather he is immensely entertained by them. As for the predictions from the cards, it's pretty much like any psychic. Say that a Middle Eastern leader will be killed next year and you have a decent chance of getting it right.
Speaking of Blankenship, his presence at Steve Jackson Games landed the company in hot water. In 1990, the Secret Service raided the business's offices and took numerous hard drives and documents. Some of these items had information regarding the Illuminati card game, but the agency had no interest in this data. Instead, the government wants to learn more about Blankenship, a hacker known as the Mentor. He worked as a system operator for the Phoenix Project, a bulletin board system for hackers. The hackers shared sensitive stolen files in this system, explaining how the 911 emergency response systems functioned. Additionally, Blankenship was the Steve Jackson Games Illuminati bulletin board system operator. When asked about the raid in an interview, he said,
SJ Games got raided because they knew I was a system operator there. The Secret Services couldn't believe that I wasn't using the SJ Games BBS as a hacker board as well. The Secret Services assumed they'd swoop in with a weak warrant and find so much incriminating evidence that I'd be forced to accept a plea bargain. Unfortunately for them, I had nothing incriminating at SJ Games.
The damaging proof was found at his home rather than at work, where he ran the Illuminati bulletin board free of any suspicious activity. The board was initially used to assist customers and test games. However, it eventually became a forum for individuals to discuss sci-fi, conspiracies, and other odd subjects. While there are several peculiar circumstances surrounding Steve Jackson Games and the Illuminati card game, there's no evidence indicating the company could have accurately predicted future events. But despite this, it is still scary to see how precise many guesses Steve Jackson Games made were accurate, and only time will tell whether the ones that haven't happened yet will ultimately come true. Let's hope they don't though. So did this card game really predict the future? Yes and no. I'll admit, some cards such as the Pentagon and Terrorist Nuke are extremely uncanny considering how accurate the predictions were. But when it comes to the cards about advocating and political correctness, those aren't really predictions since they are retelling the past, and history does repeat itself a lot, as I stated earlier. And that is the end of the card game that predicted the future. And like I said earlier in this video is much shorter than normal because there's not that much information on this topic. It is pretty limited, and I just told you guys everything that happened with Steve Jackson Games, and that's pretty much it. Nothing more to talk about. So the information about this topic is very limited, but other than that, thank you guys so much for watching till the end of this video. It truly does mean a lot to me. IRL haunted videos coming very soon. I got some places that I'm very interested in going to, and who knows, I might bring your favorite YouTuber along, but time will tell. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and I'll see you guys in my next video. See you guys.